Memoirs are autobiographical narratives based on the memories of the author, but memories are malleable. Memories morph and degrade over time. That is why we cannot remember what we had for breakfast a year ago or what we did when we were 1 year old. Memories are not resistant to the passing of time, and when they aren't degraded by time, they are exaggerated and stretched. What may have actually been a tiny spider or a small scrape becomes a huge monster and a gushing wound. While we would like to trust the authors of memoirs explicitly, we, the reader, must remember that their memories are no less vulnerable than our own. You must learn to view their story as a single perspective and interpret it with skepticism. Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi is not exempt from this trend. While it is an influential contribution to not only memoirs as a genre, but also comics, it is just as vulnerable to the influence of time on memory as every other memoir. It is important for the reader to remember this effect when reading Persepolis and any other biographical works, especially critically acclaimed and influential works such as Persepolis, Fun Home, Mouse, and others. In Persepolis, there is a strong focus on childhood. The graphic memoir is a narration of what it was like to grow up in a religious and political war zone. For the average reader, Margie's childhood would seem foreign and extreme, but the presentation of the story is done in such a way that all of the events seem normal to the narrator. This is the life she knew. It isn't strange for her because she doesn't know a different life. The reader needs to keep this in mind when reading. The author's perspective cannot and should not be removed from the work. In Persepolis, the reader is first presented with Margie's childish fantasies. She dreams of becoming a prophet, telling everyone, and because she is a child, they indulge her. But her childish innocence is a constant in most of the narrative. While Margie matures little by little throughout the comic, she often behaves in a way indicative of her youthful naivety. The first sight of her maturity is when her friend's house is blown up. She finally begins to realize just how serious everything in her life is. The first book ends with Margie watching her father carry her fainting mother away. This scene is the pinnacle of the narrative and the end of her maturation in Book 1. Throughout the first few chapters, the reader is presented with the narrative voice of a child. Satrapi presents her story from her point of view as a child, taking the audience through her childhood as she experienced it. Of course, at the time of her writing her story, she had the advantage of hindsight and age, the influence of which can be seen in the conversations between adult characters in the memoir. This knowledge therefore obscures the narrative and her memory of the events. Because memory isn't perfect, it would be nearly impossible to perfectly recreate exact conversations from her childhood. Gaps would have to be filled, and this extrapolation of events could lead to unintentional fallacy in her narrative. A common practice in literature is that of allusions. These are present in every type of literary work, from Dickens novels to popular song lyrics to memoirs to comics. While Satrapi does not make as significant a use of them as Bechtel and Fun Home, there are many references to the Western culture that became a black market in Iran during her childhood. The difference between the references in Persepolis and those in Fun Home is that while both enhance the narrative, those used in Persepolis were part of events in her life, while the references in Fun Home, with a few exceptions, are used as a self-reflective addition to her story, added by hindsight. According to William Bradley, these additions made by Bechtel increase the effect of Fun Home being more like a self-reflective graphic essay than a memoir, when compared to works such as Satrapi's Persepolis and Mouse by Art Spiegelman. In many cultures around the world, comics are rising in popularity, but there still exists a stigma that often prevents the subject matter from being taken seriously. As discussed by Ina Dankar and Antikant Singh Bhatti, in India, comics tend to be viewed as comical and childish, and they should only be read by certain types of people. This trend is present even in America, but the increasing presence of graphic memoirs, along with significant contributions to the literary world, such as Watchmen, are slowly removing this stigma from society. A large part of this trend is the fact that graphic memoirs bring the author's perspective and experiences to life for the viewer. The comic mode allows for a dynamic interaction between author and audiences that could be lacking in written works. So while an author's own bias should be taken into consideration when reading memoirs, being able to see the world through another person's eyes is an integral part of life. An interesting concept in biographical and autobiographical works is the difference in perspective between the author and the audience. In a book like Persepolis, rebelling against society is normal and communists are the good guys, comparatively speaking. But in America, both of those things will be looked down upon. By telling her story, Satrapi gives the reader the opportunity to consider and reevaluate pre-existing assumptions about Iranians and the war by showing what it was like on the inside. This new perspective can give the audience an opportunity for empathy and greater understanding. In many ways, Margie was a child like any other. She had friends, she acted out, and she loved music. The difference is that she grew up in a country in turmoil. She grew up with bomb threats and fear of imprisonment over exposed hair. Because of these differences, she had to grow up a lot faster than most of us. Her life experiences are what make her story unique and separate her from the rest of us. This uniqueness is also what makes her story so compelling. The audience gets to see life through new eyes, and it gets to know what life can be like for others, while still maintaining connections through the similarities such as childish innocence and love for family and friends. The bias and perspective present in Satrapi's memories, while possibly detrimental to the overall accuracy, are what make her story what it is. Without embellishment here and there, the story wouldn't be nearly as moving. It is important to remember when reading a memoir that it is written by an author with a bias and knowledge of the events that the reader cannot have. The events portrayed are recreations of what actually happened, and the way the information is translated from author to reader is determined by the author, influencing not only portrayal but reader interpretation. What may be a simple, everyday event for the author can seem profound and dysfunctional to the audience. Conversely, what may be portrayed as strange to the author could be a normal occurrence for the audience. While the artist-audience relationship is a two-way street, the traffic is largely directed by the author, and the reader should keep this in mind when reading all works, but especially memoirs.